Hello, world, and welcome back to Practicing Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. My name is Sarah, and I'm here with my friend Lizelle. And today we're going to be talking about episode 8, which is called The Buddha and Mindfulness. So, to begin, we're going to visit a quote.
Hello, world. Yes, I had a great longing for Carl Gustav Jung again this week, and then since it is, we were doing the Buddha and the Eastern philosophy, I picked up this book. It's about Taoism actually, but close enough. And so I just have a quote from Jung then. The way is not without danger. Everything good is costly, and the development of the personality or character is one of the most costly of all things. It is a question of saying yes to oneself, of taking oneself as the most serious of tasks, of being conscious of everything one does, and keeping it constantly before one's eyes in all its dubious aspects. Truly a task that taxes us to the utmost. I hear mindfulness in this, but I also hear, again, the danger of the way, the importance of developing character, developing the mind, fine-tuning our instrument, and then, as we said in the beginning, the importance of John Vervaeke and his work, that harness that we have, that we can rely upon while we are walking the way that is not without danger.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so, yeah, that is a good, culminating quote there, because it's not so obvious how it's dangerous until you experience it. That kind of like free fall moment where you didn't have a harness, and the whole existential crisis, you start to spiral. Yeah. So, I mean, that's actually what we're going straight into is back to Siddhartha, who's been growing up in this palace in the having mode because his father received from the oracle the message that his son would either be king and serve in that legacy, or he would become a religious person. And so in order to avoid him becoming the religious person and to, have him assume his role as the king, he's raised him in this way that he didn't really experience any sort of pain or sickness of other people. So we're back in the palace, but the curiosity is too great. And so Siddhartha grows up and wants to leave the palace. And so the story goes that he's with Chandra, who is apparently oblivious to this way in which Siddhartha was
We all
raised.
need a fool in our story as well, right? That's the fool in the story, but the zero fool.
Yeah. The fool's friend too. So Chandra's taken Siddhartha around after the curiosity leads Siddhartha out of the palace. And the palace is representative of the having mode. And so what he experiences on this kind of escapade around the city is that first he sees a sick person. And he's like, what's wrong with that guy? And Chandra is explaining to him very matter-of-factly, like, well, he's sick. Well, don't you know? Like, he doesn't. And then he becomes distressed. But they continue around, and then they experience someone that is old. And so he's like, Siddhartha turns to Chandra and he's like, is he sick too? Which is like, this is so funny. So he's like, no, he's old.
But I have to now think of, I don't know, I was still a child, but it wasn't me, it was someone else. That when we saw one of our great grandmothers Like one of the children freaked out because an old person is not always a pretty thing.
No.
It's it does look as if there's something seriously wrong with this person.
Yeah.
Like someone forgot to iron them or something.
Right.
So if you've never seen old age, I can imagine that it is actually quite like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I live with elders, so it's pretty it can get gross sometimes. Like my grandpa's just belching while I'm eating. And for a long time I was like, doesn't he have any manners? Like, but then I started to realize this is what it is to fall
Yeah.
apart. And
Yeah.
when you just stay by as an observer
Yeah.
and no judgment, it's just like, well,
Yeah.
it's pretty gross, but whatever. So then Siddhartha and Chandra are like, they have to get back to the palace because Siddhartha's like, I can't handle it. No, get me back now. And on the way back to the palace, he sees a corpse in a funeral procession. And he's like, what is it? Is he sick? Is he old? Like, what's going on with that guy? And Chandra's like, no, he's dead.
The naivety
And
in that question, right? Is this
yeah.
dude sick or old? Like, you know, two bad words and you
Yeah.
immediately go to those two.
Right. That's exactly what, yeah. So what John says here is that his having mode is completely undermined, and that's when he hits the existential crisis.
Yes.
And then he experiences the being mode because when
First,
he's
I just want to say he's waking up to what is actually real, what's going on in the world.
yeah,
That's what is happening here.
and
He's having
it's
that awakening to like,
I kept thinking of the word salient, like it became more salient to him.
yeah. It became salient to him, full stop, not more salient because he didn't see it at all previously. So, yeah, he's waking up to reality.
Yeah, and so then he tries to get back to the palace, but I guess they experience someone that has, okay, the word is mendicant, a wandering person, and he sees a deep peace in this man's eyes. So it's like somebody that has fully embraced the being mode.
That is what John says it is.
Yeah,
Yes.
introduction with the being mode. Just someone that has realized peace when he's like just had this whole existential moment of like experiencing the worst things that he's ever seen, but then he sees this man that's at peace.
His entire being is in distress. John uses those words, and I think it's beautiful words.
Mm-hmm.
His entire being is in distress, and then he sees this person who has peace. Which, I mean, if you're in distress, what is it that you most long for?
Yeah.
Peace, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then, so he was brought, like I said previously, like John also in the series bring us to a point where we're like, what? Like everything is like meaningless. And then he goes on, say, but wait. And that is this point where Siddhartha is like, what? And then he sees this person who has an alternative, who's presenting him with an alternative. And I do also again want to mention the whole awakening to, or John uses the word awakening about what is actually going on. I prefer awakening to what is actually going on in reality. And then we were talking about how this series might as well have been called not awakening from the meaning crisis, which we get to at the end. And I think after Socrates is going to be more about that, awakening from the meaning crisis. But this one might very well have been called awakening to the meaning crisis. I think many people, me as well, I'm quite because of my chronic cheerfulness, I tend to be a little bit in my own world, la la da, la da da, like, you know. So this really awakened me to the meaning crisis, and it is an important thing to be able to do. We talked about that is the first step of recovering. For instance, when you're an alcoholic,
Yep.
like you have to acknowledge, oh shit, I've got a problem. Like, oh, and this is what the problem is. It's my addiction is the problem. Or here's like, yeah, sometimes I felt really crappy. Like, what is that about? Like, why do I feel so lonely and isolated and so blah? And life is just this roller coaster, which is so empty.
Yeah, you didn't
Well,
know. Yeah.
yeah. Well, meaning crisis, meaning
Yeah.
crisis. So
Right.
that's an awakening to the meaning crisis then. What, yeah, what
Yeah.
we're what Siddhartha was experiencing is like he didn't know he was in a crisis.
Right.
And then like,
In fact, everything seemed fine. I
yeah,
was
yeah,
like, let's just go gallivanting because I'm bored and I'm
yeah.
curious what's out there.
It's so easy in the palace to tell yourself that everything is fine
Totally.
because you're never hungry. You It's easy. Whatever you need, you can go online, have it in a day.
Yep.
It's even if it's a man,
Yeah.
you go online, you can have it in that in an hour. Like,
Right.
been there, done that.
Oh
Like,
God, don't get me started on online dating and how that's biologically not not good for women to try to be pursuing men that expect sex out of them. Anyways, okay. Yeah, no, I that's just not even knowing that there's a meaning crisis is where most people are at, and they're just like, I feel like crap. I don't have anybody that I can relate to on this, and there's just like this wandering of, well, what is it?
yeah.
That's a really good point. Um, so yeah, after he experiences this man that's at peace, he essentially, it's John says that he cannot get back to the palace, even if he
Mm,
tried. He can't actually
mm,
get back to that having mode, being running all the time,
mm.
because now he's experienced someone that's in the being mode. So then we wanted to move into this word disillusionment.
I think that's more why you can't return to the palace because the illusion has been shattered. It's like
Mm,
you can bullshit yourself, but you can't lie to yourself. And once you have seen the truth, it's like you
yeah,
can't unsee it.
you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Right. Yeah.
I've
Like
never
the
heard that one. It's a good
really,
one.
my astrologer instructor uses that one, and then I saw recently Duncan Trussell used that one too, and I was like, okay, I mean that keeps coming back to me, so I like that too. Can't unsee it, can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. um yeah, it's out, the cat's out of the bag. And
Yeah.
so yeah, the disillusionment, he really goes into like describing this word, because we usually use it in this way of experiencing loss, and it's like sad. It's
Mm,
like, oh, I became disillusioned and now I'm sad because I lost something. But
mm.
you lost an illusion, you lost something false, so this is actually
Yeah.
a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I like the you used the word despair. I like that a lot. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I have.
Because of Christopher. I just love the word despair.
Christopher.
Master Pietro.
Oh, okay.
He,
Yeah.
he's deep into the work of Kierkegaard,
Mm,
and he Kierkegaard works a lot with despair. So
nice. Yeah, I have that. um it's the loss of the illusion, so losing the sense of belonging. He doesn't belong in the palace anymore.
mm,
So there's
mm.
something irreversible that happens.
Oh, that is very deep. I think if we had more time, we could have really gone down this path as well,
Yeah,
using the
yeah,
sense of belonging.
right.
Because he never really did belong, did he?
No,
He
no.
was just having.
Yeah, and that was kind of put upon him too, the
Yeah,
environment within which he was
yeah,
raised. So
yeah,
he had no kind of way of knowing anything different of
yeah.
belonging to.
He had no real connection. So even that, he lost his fake connections. You were referring earlier to the example that John always uses about relationship, which you want to know if someone's cheating.
Yep.
And John also uses the example of what if your parents told you at a certain point, like they never really loved you.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
they were actually just hired by the government to raise you as an experiment. Like that's fake connection that you're losing.
Right. But it hurts. And
Oh, it
that's the thing
hurts.
about the despair that you were mentioning.
It
It's like
hurts so
that,
badly.
being cheated on, having your parents tell you at 18 that they never loved you and they were hired. Like, oh my God, the heart
Yeah,
wrenching
yeah,
feeling that I get from that is just
yeah,
despair.
yeah. Despair, indeed. It's It's horrible because everything then is questioned, like you said. The rug is completely gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
so
Ugh.
that's where Siddhartha is.
Yeah, that's where Siddhartha is. And in fact, because of that, he actually even decides to leave his wife and his child. And so there's this whole moral question that John
Yeah.
brings up is whether or not that was, you deserted your family. Like, how great can you be?
Mm.
But he says that the moral life sits upon something deeper. And even morality can be rendered meaningless because there's something deeper than simply living a moral existence. So Siddhartha begins to follow the path of the renouncers here
Yes.
and just going from teacher to teacher, kind of brutalizing his body and um, all of this trials and tribulations that he's going through is to cultivate a solution to that fear and turmoil that he experienced from
Mm-hmm.
seeing the people, out and
Mm-hmm.
about.
I think we can deeply relate to this, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
We lost certainty and then we go searching frantically, like, what about this teacher? No,
Mm-hmm.
no. What about this teacher? Mm. So we can very much relate. And I'm sure many, many
Many
million
people.
of people can relate to this despair and then the frantic search for hope or for
Mm-hmm.
faith. Because for Kierkegaard, it's despair set against faith. Um,
Mm.
it's,
Yeah, I'm reminded of like all the different systems that I tried to use to, you know, face my fear. And it was like
mhm,
asking my dad, what are you most afraid of? It was going to starve myself in the woods for 2 days. It's like,
yeah,
give me a message. Like it's literally called a vision quest.
mm,
You're searching for a vision. Like, just give
yeah,
me something.
yeah,
Why doesn't this make sense anymore that I'm here?
mm,
So, yeah, I think a lot of people can relate with that rug pull
mm. And the desperate search
and the
that
desperate
follows
search. Mm-hmm.
the rug pull. But the problem is what he talks about here with Siddhartha and with many of us then, we stay searching in the same mode. We
Yeah,
stay searching in the having mode
in the
because
having
that's the
mode.
mode we know.
Yeah.
We only know the palace. We only know having and how to meet our needs with this in this mode. It's
It's funny because even just now I said, give me something. I wanted a vision.
yes,
I needed to be given
yes.
something to make it make sense. I couldn't just accept the fact that I was being,
Yeah.
or I could,
Oh, it's beautiful. I didn't even hear it until you now said it again. It's
it was because
perfect.
you repeated back to me and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, it is the being mode. It is this reverse search of the being mode. It's like, okay, if I can't have chocolate and I can't have alcohol, then what can I have?
Exactly. What can I have?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And that's a problem with meaning as well. Meaning can also be something we have.
yeah.
If I can't have chocolate or alcohol, well, that's basically my whole life revolves around those two. So then at
There
least
are
gives me
other things that I didn't mention. Those were the mild ones.
then give me meaning.
Yep.
But so meaning can also be something that we can have.
Right.
So even in having meaning, there could be modal confusion.
Mm-hmm. Rather than life being meaningful.
Yes.
Yeah. Very cool. So, in that sense, John says that Siddhartha hasn't actually fully left the palace because he's still operating from that being mode, or sorry, that
Having,
having mode. And so he says that he's now pursuing asceticism and subjecting his body to trial and pain in this kind of the objective there is self denial. So he's moved from self indulgence to now self denial. So these are extremes of a spectrum.
mhm, mm. The words that I wrote down is when you negate something, you are still framing it in the same way. And what came to mind is the whole non theism that John talks about as well. Like um, if we want to learn how to, uh, well, a different type of religion, it's we're used to having either theism, so there's a God, or framing it in the same way, actually non-theism, atheism.
Mm-hmm.
It's still thinking in the same, framing it in the same way, and yeah, I think maybe his mind was thinking in this around this when he was going to the whole non-theism thing. It's really something I desperately want to get into, being able to see non-theistically. I think that would be something that I would like to have.
Give it to me. I would like to be, really,
I would like to be, yeah, uh, non,
non-theistic
yeah,
as opposed to atheistic or just
yeah,
theistic.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that I can believe in gods anymore, like actual existence of gods. But I've tried like atheism for a year. I
Mm-hmm.
read, everyone should be an atheist for at least a year so that you can read
Try
Richard
it.
Dawkins. Like everyone, you have to actually really be able to absorb Richard Dawkins. And if you read him as a theist, you don't really absorb him as well as you do when you read him as an atheist.
Oh, totally.
So I think it's cool too. I'm glad but that was a year, and I've spent a lot of time in a lot of conditions, and that was the shortest. Like atheism
Yep.
doesn't suit me very well. Agnosticism suits me very well. But I don't know, non-theism sounds so cool. I would
Yeah.
love to be able to be a non-theist.
Yeah. When you first mentioned it, I was like, I can't even imagine that. But I've
Exactly.
also experienced the atheistic whenever I was so embedded in biology.
Yeah.
I mean, we even had a talk in class of evolution versus God. How can you accept
Yeah.
both? And I was okay with it. I was just like, well, if you guys want to believe that, then I'm going to make your God even greater by telling you that evolution is real. So
Yeah.
I was like really, on my
Yeah.
own soapbox about how sure you want to believe a guy in the sky, that's fine, but this is what it really is. And I got really into that intellectual mind of we got to
Yeah.
explain it away.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did about 3 years full on atheist, I would say. Although I wasn't claiming the title, I was
Yeah.
following the path of biology and evolution that did not include a God.
Yeah. Which is exactly this. Like you negate something, you are still framing it in the same way.
Yep.
That's exactly
Yeah.
this. So I think it's a really good analogy.
Yeah,
This,
totally. I like that a lot, and I want to explore that some more.
yeah, but also
Um,
how difficult it is, because we both feel difficulty moving into the non-theistic, and it's the same, like moving from that having mode,
yep.
in overindulgence to completely denying yourself. Those two comes easy. We know how to move from the one to the other quite seamlessly.
Mm-hmm.
But the third way,
Yep.
like, that's how do we make that leap?
Right.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, leap of faith.
Leap of faith. Gosh, stop it. We're getting to the middle path, but we still got a little bit here because he's trying to annihilate the self. And like you're saying, it's still thinking about having a self. So he's still in this having mode of trying to have his self. It's like have yourself and eat it too, or don't eat. So he's still modally confused. It's not transcendence, it's just the negation of self indulgence. Okay, so we find now Siddhartha is washed up or fatigued on the banks of a river. And in this moment, he hears a barge with a musician that has an apprentice. And the musician is scolding the apprentice. He's saying, no, listen, the strings can't be too tight or too loose. And this is what we're talking about with that middle path.
Mhm. I love that. The attunement, the idea of attunement as
Yeah.
mindfulness.
So we're talking about that middle path and rejecting self indulgence and self denial. And so basically, we've got to mention the fact that Siddhartha was saved because he's drowning on the banks of the river and very fatigued, and then a little girl saves him. And we really wanted to emphasize the fact that it was a little girl because I told you that John even says in this episode, it was demeaning. And I wanted to explore that further because I was like, yeah, I get it. Like culture now thinks that, and maybe even this story evolved in such a way that that is the case. But you mentioned that it's better to think about it as the humility of Siddhartha here.
Yeah, I think there's, like I told you, because it's a myth, every aspect is meaningful. It's not historically true necessarily, but it's meaningful, every single detail. So the fact that it was a little girl is meaningful. It does want to tell us something. I'm not quite sure what it wants to tell us something. But if it's a little girl was probably the lowest, because in India there is the caste system.
Yep.
So there's very much layers of untouchables and
Yep.
what is, so it's very much the lowest form of being as he knows it that saved him. But the only link that I can make in my mind at this stage is with Jesus saying, you have to become like a little child if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
So the lowest form of being is more exalted than the highest form of having.
That's so beautiful. Yeah.
That's what comes to my mind.
I need to put quotes around that. That's beautiful. Yeah, and so that helped me a lot with, dealing with that part of the story because, yeah, it felt, I don't know, it just hit me in a different way. But she gave him rice pudding, and then that's when he realized that he must transcend. And so we move into this word called sati that I never knew before, that now I am in love with, which is to remember or to bring to mind the modal memory to recover a mode, is how John describes it.
Remembering a lost mode of being, I wrote. And then I also wrote, but this is my own words, remembering what it means to be human. Especially because he says, remember.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what it means to be human, what we've lost, is that being a member of a species. We're so individualistic and so proud that we can do everything on our own. We can have everything on our own, but we can't be fully human on our own. That's just not human.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, sati, I told you I'm also madly in love with this word. Like,
Yeah.
it's such a cool. John, I knew it from, I think, his meditation course. He also talked about sati there, and it's a beautiful concept. It's a beautiful concept.
Yeah. So he does mention alone with others at this part, by Bachelor.
Yeah,
I want to read this
awesome
book.
book. Awesome book. I highly recommend it indeed. He says a word that it sounds like he's not recommending it because he's pronounced it in a way that it's like, when he pronounce it, I'm like, oh, that can be heard differently.
I
But
think I remember that part too. I just don't remember the word, but yeah.
yeah,
He says like I don't remember exactly.
I think it says highly recommended, but it sounds like he says heartily recommended.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
I
was like,
heard that too. Yep.
So John highly recommends it, and I highly recommend it as well. There's a lot of pages that in here that I with Sarah I wrote on the top, and then there's a few pages that I mentioned, and the arrows I wrote 8 pages, but we'll get to that in the future. There's a wisdom thing that and a meaning thing that I thought, I don't know, do you want me to read something?
Sure, yeah, totally.
Okay, there's one part, and I think I wrote it with Sarah, and this is appropriate for this episode, about following the crowd, and I thought maybe that will be something that also speaks to you on a
Totally.
personal level. I wrote it on the read it on the 1st of January. I love starting my year with a significant book,
Yeah.
and yeah, so We justify all such activity by appealing to the authority of them, the public, the crowd. But in doing so, we lose our very selves, and our voices become just further stereotyped echoes of what everyone else thinks and says. In short, we become absorbed in the dimensions of having. And then on the next page, our whole lives have been spent in restless pursuit of distant shadows and phantoms, while that which is the closest to us, our very existence, our being, has been ignored.
Mm.
That's
That's so interesting because while you were reading the first part, I was like, yeah, it's like being a member of the having club.
yes.
That's what kind of like what we strive for if we follow this kind of commercial programming that's been put upon us.
Yeah. Oh, that's really well said. Being a member of the having club,
Yeah.
because that is the way we are human nowadays.
Yeah.
We yeah. We could have
Yeah.
gone very deep into this as well if we had more time, I
I
think.
know, I know. It's of course the one day that I have a meeting after this one. Um, but I think sometimes that kind of thing happens to us because it is to be brief and then we can always go back and
Yes.
watch it ourselves too. But
There is another episode where he also recommends this book. So then we'll go deeper into.
perfect. This idea of sati is actually what's so beneficial about us having this discussion every 2 weeks, is that I re-enter who I was when we first started it. And I can listen to that conversation and hear how naive, how ignorant I was to like what I was getting myself into. And it's just opening up so much for me in different areas of life because we're discussing it. And I found in my biology degree too that the classes like organic chemistry, where I had a study partner and she and I would go every week, we were meeting like nearly like 3 times a week to talk about it. I did much better than in classes where I tried to just doodle up my notes again or whatever. But even recording my lectures and re-listening to them in my head and then writing it out was a little bit more beneficial than just trying to read through a textbook and write notes and hope that I pass a test.
This book also talks about dialectic and the importance indeed of articulating what we have faith in. That's part of what I want to read with the coven.
Nice.
And for me the same. I studied at university as well. I had two friends that we were always studying together. If it wasn't for them, I would not have done half as well as I did.
Right.
Because talking about things just helps you remember.
Yeah. Yeah. It puts that sati because it's like,
Yeah.
okay, now we've had a discussion for it afterwards and I was engaged. And so my mind can go back to that place of being engaged in this conversation.
Although sati as a religious or spiritual concept is a different type of remembering. It is really this remembering who you really are. That type of remembering. And then John, like I said previously, he very cockseyed. He cockseyes it completely. He makes it very scientific, which is great, which is why we follow John. We love this scientific interpretation of the spiritual way of being. But that's different from, because later he comes to memory and how memory works. But this is a different type of sati. That's why remembering the being mode, that is more what sati is, remembering who you really are. That is a spiritual taste of sati.
Nice. I keep wanting to say, remember who you really be. That is just the word conjugated. So,
Well, we can shorten it to be.
yeah,
just be. Like,
yeah, and remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now Siddhartha wants to kind of cultivate a set of mindfulness psychotechnologies to sati the being mode, to awaken.
Yes. Yes.
And I think, though, we wanted to mention something about serious play when we were talking about the Alone with Others book as well, unless you wanted to wait on that part.
Well, when I wrote down Sati, mindfulness, waking up, the awakened one, recovering who you really are, I we're not quite with her book yet,
Okay.
but I wrote it here because I use serious play as a way, and I think John advises that as well, as a way to recover who you are, or recover, at least to he like a little boy wants to know what it is to be like a brave person, so he becomes Zorro. Like, I want to know what it is to be a wise person, in the sense of a wise old woman, in the sense of one who learns ancient wisdom and transfers it, in the sense of a priestess, in other words. So I'm seriously playing
Mm-hmm.
priestess.
This is why we
And
dress as we do.
yeah,
Not that we ever
yeah,
wanted to mention that part, but like I'm in this. It's so interesting that that's the exact same feeling that I've had, is that I want to be a wise person. I want to be an elder. And so I'm
yes,
in elder training.
yes, this is what it is. Um, becoming a because I was thinking a lot about, okay, I want to be a wise old woman one day. How do you become a wise old woman? And the wise old woman from the past, if we don't call them witches, we call them priestesses. So I prefer to be called priestess, not a witch. So play is almost always mindful, she writes. And then what is, she doesn't call it serious play, but to me this just screams serious play. Play may be taken seriously, but it is the play and not ourselves that we are taking seriously, or else it is not really play at all. And why serious play is so important for remembering sati, recovering who you are, um, then I had to think of John's four ways of knowing, and I think maybe it's good that we talk about it now already, because he does refer to the participatory knowing, and
Mm-hmm.
I think we kind of have a sense of what participatory knowing is, right? It's, I don't know if you know the four P's of knowing.
No, 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 no.
Okay, cool. So, because it's very important to John's work. So, participatory knowing is if you, like we do, we participate in this role of wise old woman. We're playing as if we are wise old woman because we hope to one day be wise old woman. That is participatory knowing. But it also important, which is he kind of hints of it, at it, but he doesn't actually name it, is um, perspectival knowing, knowing what it is like to be, have the perspective to see as the wise old woman. So then you also embody, you play this role, so that you learn how it is like to see as the wise old woman, to have the perspective. And the other one is procedural knowing, which is also very important in the ritual parts. Like, what is the procedures we participate in? What is the procedures we, like knowing how to throw a ball, but also knowing how to conduct a ritual so that those participating will find it meaningful and will grow, cultivate wisdom by participating in that ritual, which is an important part of being an elder, being able to uh, facilitate the cultivation of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I think the four P's of knowing, and the other one is propositional, which is like uh, just having the facts, which is also important to know the facts. But John always speaks of, we've been stuck in propositional tyranny for a very long time. And so that is usually the only thing we look at, while the others are actually the transformational part. We can have propositions, and I guess we can also have a perspective, but that already brings us close into the being mode,
Mm-hmm.
to be like, what is it like to be like uh, um, a wise old woman? So it's really important. These 4 P's of knowing is important to the sati, to remembering, to recovering who we are. That's why I wanted to, and then especially in connection with serious pain. This is how I interpret everything. But of all the things of John that I feel like I kind of understand, I think I get this.
Nice.
So
Yeah, I'm glad you explained that, because I hear, he references it, but because I listened to him outside of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis,
yeah,
a lot of different videos, because there again, I'm trying to get his perspective.
yeah,
I feel like the more I listen to him, the more I understand because you sent me like a 3-hour talk that he had at Ralston College, where it's like, you were like, you're going to understand where we're going from here. And it did. It helped to put that perspective in. And
yeah.
yeah.
There's also someone else going through the 4 P's of knowing, which is like 6 minutes, which is a really good video. I'll send that to you as well.
Okay. Yeah, we can link it. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, I had that written down a little early, but basically,
well, it goes with sati, and that's why we
yeah.
refer
Okay.
to it now instead of when he gets to the book.
So in this process of trying to cultivate that set of mindfulness psychotechnologies to sati, the being mode, it's to awaken. And then he becomes the Buddha, the awakened one. So Siddhartha Gautama is the Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
And then we take a turn into Cogsci. Leaving the philosophy, leaving Greece and India now, and moving into the present, I guess, or at least, yeah. What's the current discussion of mindfulness in the realm of cognitive science? Because that's what we have. And I guess this is kind of like that propositional type of knowing, because he starts to talk about people talking about mindfulness, proposing ideas for what mindfulness is, but they just continue to come up with a list of things.
I would think, I don't know, this is like, I'm just saying it now and thinking it for the first time, that the language of explaining will be propositional, and the language of training will be procedural, because it teaches you the procedure, how
Nice.
to. I think so. I'm not sure.
Nice. Yeah, because he talks about how there's an academic attempt to explain mindfulness and a pedagogical technique to teach it. And he's kind of delving into both of those languages.
Yeah. Which is another, like we talked in the beginning, one of the great reasons to follow his work. And I explicitly always say to follow his work and not him, because we don't want to make him some sort of guru, though guru actually just means teacher, and he is a teacher. So, but it's his work that, because he has both. He has both. He has experience training and he has experience explaining. And he works scientifically with mindfulness, and he works spiritually with mindfulness. So yeah, it's great combination in one person, like 2 for the price of 1 type of thing.
Well, it's like he's bilingual. I mean, it literally is bilingual in that way, where he's a translator, and he can move into this spiritual realm that he hates the word spiritual, but whatever it is that he's kind of digging into on this side of the kind of embodiment is kind of how I describe it, where there's that intellectual versus embodiment. And so there's this intellectual way of explaining things, but there's this embodied way of teaching it.
Yeah. Living it,
being it. Yeah.
Being it.
And so he goes really deep into like different ways of memorizing things and like training memory, and particularly that kind of like spatial memory, where we go into a room and he in that room you're going to place all the things that you need to remember, because your room, or the places that you go, and so you can just use spatial memory, which I think a lot of us know that way of learning things. And he even actually says that it's the palace too, which I thought was funny. But
let's go back to the palace,
right? And the homunculus who was going through those rooms
I was waiting for him to use his little homunculus voice, but he didn't in this one.
No, I know, he just referred to him as Bob. I did find, I looked up the name for the biological little homunculus that's like a sperm with a big head and a tail, and it's called preformation. I mentioned that in a previous video, but
Okay.
preformation is this theory of how humans develop, and they're adorable too. But it's just, that's just an aside. So here he mentions that there's this cognitive psychology book which argues that this is actually wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being, it's not spatial memory. Things aren't just like close to each other in your head when you're trying to remember them. He uses the example of the color blue being very close to the color red and also being close to shoe. And it's like, okay, so shoe and red are close together. No, they're not.
I
So
had to write down ruby shoes, ruby slippers. That did come to mind immediately.
rubies, yeah. That's funny. Actually, John, I can put
When you
them
say
together.
shoe, yeah, red comes to mind.
Yeah. Red high heels.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, what he's trying to do here is to illustrate the difference between language of training and the language of explaining.
mhm,
Because when you train your memory, you do this palace construction, and then that's a very good way to train your memory. But you shouldn't try to explain memory like that, because that is wrong. That's why it refers to the Coxeye book. It's been scientifically proven that's not how our memory works. So that's what he explaining. Like, just because something is a good way to train, it
mhm.
doesn't mean it is propositionally true that
Yeah,
that is the way you should teach it.
right.
So, uh,
I'm thinking of like
yeah.
mnemonics, like, with the planets and stuff. My very good mother just served us 9 pizzas or something like that. Pluto's not a planet anymore, but anyway. But yeah, it's like I trained my brain to know those mnemonics, but they're not actually. I mean, my mom would serve my friends pizza, but
Not
like,
nine.
right.
Well,
But the whole point is that this is great for training, but it's not great
mm,
for explaining. It's just
yeah,
overly simplistic, he says. And I have this
yeah,
quote: the language we use to train memory should not be imported uncritically into scientific attempts to explain it and understand it. And the reason, well, another kind of way that he describes this is that one of these listed words for how to describe mindfulness is to say, pay attention. And
mhm,
he's like, look at my finger, look at it. And he just like goes on and he's like demanding that you do the thing. And it's like, that doesn't work for your brain. So that's those strings being too tight.
yeah,
And then he like uses the example of just do whatever.
yeah,
And that's the strings being too loose. But then he describes his finger and he's like, look at my finger and notice that it's bigger at the bottom and smaller at the top. And like he's just continually reviving your interest, I think is how he put it.
mhm,
He's like continually making you interested in the thing as opposed to
mhm,
demanding that you do something or just being blase about or laissez faire,
yeah,
like
yeah,
hands off.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, because when you tell people like to meditate, a lot of people will be like, you got to block out your thoughts. It's like, okay, well, that's real easy. Let me just try that. When I try to block out my thoughts, I'm thinking more about
mhm.
my thoughts, and like, oh my God, I shouldn't be having that. So
He does go into this in detail in his when he actually teaches meditation as well.
nice. I did
So he
watch like
uses it.
two of his meditation videos. Um, so that's actually something that while we go through it after Socrates, I'd like to pair up with it and see if I can have that, as an accompaniment.
John released the first episode, and I think I can say this. It's not the first episode of After Socrates. He released to his patrons, so I've
Ah.
seen it.
Oh.
Sarah,
I'm
it's
gonna
gonna
like
be
it.
good.
I'm so excited that we're doing that at the Stoa too. I can't wait.
Yeah,
Like I've moved everything in my schedule. Like guys, I can't plan anything at this time because I have a philosophical practice that I have to attend.
it's gonna be so good. And the first episode, he does also he talks about the puppy dog and come here, puppy dog, or oh, puppy dog, I do what you want to do. It's like these two different ways of
Yeah.
forcing someone or asking someone to pay attention.
He does talk again about bringing back Plato, and that
Mm-hmm.
knowledge is not just captured by a list of features. There's that
Mm-hmm.
eidos. And I was telling you that's so interesting. I just thought about the fact that I know how to skin a bird, I know how to skin a duck. And I had yesterday, I was going to work in my garden, but my sister called me and was like, "Can you come teach me how to do this?" Actually, she didn't even say, "Come teach me." She was asking me questions. I was like, "Do you want me to come up there?" And so I did. And nobody that works there, my dad or our employee that's 18, she doesn't know how to explain things or train in a way that all she can do is explain. And her way of
Mm-hmm.
explaining to my sister was, you just skin it like any other animal. And my sister doesn't know how to skin any other animal. So I was using analogies and things like that and reasoning. I was like giving her reasons why she does it in a certain way and describing it to her fully. And I said she kept having insights of,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that makes sense. Now that you say it that way, now I get it. And so there
Mm-hmm.
was like that in my life, there was an example of this explaining versus training. And it was before I had watched the video and took notes on
Cool.
it. So I was like, what? So the bird example was great because I intimately know birds.
Yeah. Contact epistemology.
Yeah, I know
You
there's
have contact
structural,
of Mr. Yeah.
yeah, structural functional organization. So
You know the essence of birds, the
yeah,
form of birds. It's it's
yeah,
it's so cool because it's also one of these things that's completely irrelevant, but it's so cool that it's like exactly the thing that he uses as an explanation. Like, yeah, that one.
you're right.
I know. I
I know what
know
a
the
big ball of feathers on the table is, and I know how to bring it back to life is to include things like physiology.
yeah,
Taxidermists have to know how a bird flies. They tuck their elbows and then they fly like this, and because you wouldn't think that, you think that that's their whole arm going, but it's
yeah,
not. And you have to know that about the bird in order to make it look alive again. My dad's
yeah.
first business was called Still Life Taxidermy because you're bringing it back to life,
Mm,
and that yeah, it's just like such an interesting way that that actually applies to my
yeah.
actual life. So very synchronistic, I would say.
Yes, yes. Perfect. You know the essence of the bird
Yeah,
by by contact epistemology,
yeah,
by
yeah.
really your having your hands and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay, and so like he keeps going over this list of to be mindful is being present, not judging, insight, and reduced reactivity.
Yeah. That is when it's a feature list. So
Okay, yeah.
that is why we talked about the bird again, because that is when you just list the items like feathers, the beak, uh,
Mm-hmm.
etc. But that doesn't really tell you what it is in its essence, the feature list. What you need is a feature schema, he says, or that getting that essence, that form, that eidos, that structural functional organization of
Mm-hmm.
how does it all correlate? How does it all work together?
Yep.
Um, yeah.
And so he takes that list, and I guess now we're going to turn it into the feature schema as opposed
Mhm,
to a feature
mhm,
list of mindfulness.
mhm. Yeah, then he separates the states from the traits. And the states that we can be in is this being present and not judging state. And then the traits that we can develop by being or entering these states is insight and reduced reactivity, which
Yeah.
yeah,
No, go ahead.
she speaks mostly of she doesn't really speak of meditation that much or contemplation, but she does speak of this reduced reactivity a lot, like how to actually, well, be present, be uh, take responsibility for your actions instead of just reacting. Make choices, cultivate your character. Don't just let it happen to you.
Mm.
That's a type of way of being mindful. That's what she's. And then we get to this book as well, because this is perfect. Mindsight is a perfect way of um, this being present, and how, especially then, it leads to reduced reactivity. Because if you're present with and aware of what is actually happening in me, and trying to feel what is happening in the other person with whom I'm, getting into mind sight into the other person as well. you're not just reacting, which is what we usually do because we're all, conditioned. You're not just reacting, you're actually acting, you're actually participating in this relationship in life. I think actually mindfulness is to fully participate in life. That is a way to see mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
He does go into a little bit of on the kind of like what I have written as the left side, which is going to be the states, the things I can do. So being present and non-judging. He's asking this question of, are these parts of a whole? Is one of them part of the other? And I don't know if that's kind of like a big point that he was making, but he did focus on that for both sides of this chart that he drew up.
I think the main thing he wants to get at here is like, it's not just a list. It's features that's interacting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
The one affects the other, and he had all these arrows, like the one goes to the other. And so it's you can't just explain mindfulness by listing all the features it has. You have to ask yourself, okay, but how do they interrelate?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that's basically what he like we said, the next one's called Insight, so I'm sure we will go deeper into that.
Yeah.
Lovely. I'm really looking forward to that.
Me too.
I'm obsessed with Insight. From a young age, the Bible often has like passages that says knowledge, insight, and wisdom. So for me, the three are very much connected, and it's been my great passion my whole life: knowledge, insight, and wisdom.
It's funny. I was looking up because our birthdays are consecutive, yours, mine, Holly, and Issa's. And I was like, what's the goddess of our month? And yours is Minerva, who is this goddess of wisdom and also
cool.
Yeah. So he starts talking about this book, that book of mindfulness, where they mention this soft vigilance is the constantly trying to renew your interest. And I like how he breaks down the word interest being intereste, to be within something. So this whole idea of concentration is modeling this idea of shining a light, which makes something stand out, and attention makes things more salient. Basically what I was trying to do was breaking out that idea of concentration, where he's talking about soft vigilance instead of concentration, because there's a right and a wrong way to concentrate. And then paying attention. I'm sorry, I said that concentration was, but it's paying attention is shining a spotlight onto something. And
well, concentrate as well is
yeah. Okay. So
could also be.
But he's like arguing that this kind of thinking about how concentration and attention works is actually not effective, I guess, at describing attention and concentration.
The spotlight is like, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. That's the spotlight.
Gotcha. String's too tight.
The string's too tight.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the kind of like the ending to this one is talking about training, and how training is optimizing how you do something else. And that's the difference, is that training, he uses the example of walking. Like, you can totally walk around, you could stop walking, you can start walking. But when you're training to do something,
practicing, he uses the word practicing, because I had to think practicing awakening from the mini crisis. It's perfect.
So funny. Yeah. So practicing is something that you're doing to optimize something else. So yeah, that is what we're doing here, is optimizing our understanding of the awakening from the meaning crisis series.
And Hands of Life.
Yeah. Okay, well, I have that. We're just going to move into the systematic insight from there, because we're going to ask this question of, how does attention get improved in mindfulness practice, and how does it bring about systemic insight or systematic insight? Awakening. I do have written. Go ahead.
I have a few words as well about soft vigilance, interesse being, that's also just being absorbed, I wrote. It reminded me of the flow state, that when you're in the flow state, you're inter essay, you're being, again, being, so that the being mode is also um, attunement. I wrote again because I really like this idea of attunement, and this is also being attuned to the other, being attuned to your body and the signals that you get from your body, and being attuned to the person you're communicating with, picking up on the signals that they're sending you through their energy or through their facial expressions, through their body language. But that requires being mindful, whatever that means. But you have to pay attention, but then the right type of attention. um yeah, I think actually everything is so simple if you can just really be interested in whatever it is you're doing. Then you can just completely lose yourself, enter the flow state, enter the mindful state of being, and just enjoy, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because it's like what led Siddhartha out of the palace was that curiosity, that actual interest. But I don't think that it had developed into interest yet. He was just curious at first. But then when he became interested, he starts like all of these different things to try to develop that, toolkit of psychotechnologies, and then becomes very invested in life and then training other people to do that.
Nice, yeah, nice connection that you made, indeed. Like,
There is something here that I have written down that you wanted to mention about the placebo.
oh yes, so when I read this book, no, sorry, wrong book.
I have too many books.
Mindfulness. Like, what came to mind was this book, actually, but it's completely unrelated. So you are the placebo, because the power of the mind is basically what this book, and how, if we live mindfully, that power is activated, set to work, and how we then become our own placebo. Like, you know what a placebo is?
Yeah, totally biologist here.
Oh yes, of course,
also health
sorry.
food store.
Oh yes, you are the placebo.
For the longest time, homeopathics to me were just it's the placebo effect. I'm tuning more to yeah,
but even a lot of actual scientific medicine is more placebo effect.
Yeah, that's why.
But that is exactly the point of this book. Like, and then especially the other one. My God, we have no idea how powerful mindfulness can be if we live aware, if we pay attention, if we choose. She goes on and on about giving people choices, giving people responsibility for their own lives, actively cultivating your character, actively cultivating wisdom. Just having that intention is already so powerful that it can absolutely transform your life. Because it transforms who you are. And that is where we want to get to. Not what can I get from this vision quest, but how can I be transformed in this vision quest? That is where we want to get to.
Yeah, from having to being.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, that I had to have that turnaround moment with homeopathics. Even I have a really good friend, and she does Kangen water, and she's like, at one point she came to visit me in Texas, and I had to go find Kangen water for this girl, which is like a balanced pH water.
Okay.
And I mean, they have a Kangen machine where you can have it below 7 pH for cleaning your skin, or you can have it way above for like a basic cleaner or whatever, but also how you consume it. And I was like, okay, we'll go find your special water, and I was I was kind of cynical about it because I was in my scientific mind of how could that possibly be true. And now, of course, I recognize how your water obviously can affect your body because we're 70 whatever percent water. But even with things like homeopathics, using that on horses, people have gotten results using homeopathics, which is essentially the placebo effect. And the horse isn't conscious of the placebo. So there, I know that kind of takes us away from the mindfulness a little bit, but even, I don't know how that works, but there's something more to it, especially when there's intention behind it. And I'm taking this to make me feel better, and therefore it makes me feel better. And oftentimes I think this is why we do develop those kinds of addictions. Like my grandparents are both on pain meds, and my grandma's a little bit better about not needing it, but my grandpa can't go a day if he doesn't get his pill, and who knows if that's, what keeps him going or whatever. But yeah, I want to explore this whole idea of placebo a little bit more too.
And she also talks about reframing a lot, which is also a mindful way of being, reframing things. What comes to mind when you talk about pain is she had people reframe, okay, you're in this pain, but if you were on a football field, but American football then, because they get hurt more than, you wouldn't even notice this pain,
right?
Or if you were doing something that you were completely absorbed in, you wouldn't even notice that you were being hurt. But because, so just reframe it, like, or people in a hospital ward who has an over, what do you, oh my God, the English word just escapes me. You look out and you see trees. Instead of you look out and you see bricks. Yeah. How that helps people to recover. And there's so much.
So much. There was even this guy that was part of the tribe that I attended for a little bit. And his mother was in stage 4 kidney failure, I think. And it was during COVID times, and they weren't going to let him back there. And he is actually truly Native American. I don't know which tribe, but he told them, he's like, I have to go in there and I have to drum for her and I have to pray over her. He's like, this is my religion. You have to let me in. And they did. And she had a full recovery. She was completely in remission. And it took like a year. And just like the beauty of that, and what we saw in those people that lost their family members over a Zoom call or whatever, how awful like our structure of society is to think that somebody should die alone, even if they are, in that kind of critical condition. It's just
horrible.
sick.
That was horrible. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So that's what definitely brought it to a more salient, or makes it salient that we need each other.
It's the shamanic influence. Like the placebo effect is what in the beginning we talked about the shaman and how the shaman probably worked because of the placebo effect. And now we all kind of, I don't know how we do it, but yeah. Well, I kind of know how we do it because I also followed the guy whose book I showed. I also followed him for a year and did his practices. It works.
Yeah.
That's all I can say. It works.
Well, we're seeing it here by doing this too, like acting and participating. It is changing who I am. This applies to so many other different places in my life. And so just that restructuring, that reframing of who I am, now I do this. And this makes me a more philosophical person in general. Yeah. So I didn't do anything, to say, okay, I'm a philosopher now. I didn't go get a degree that says, okay, PhD in philosophy. I'm being it.
Exactly. Not having a degree, but being a philosopher.
Yeah.
I love that.
Love it.
Ka-ching!
That's a great way to end. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess we'll be back soon to discuss more on insight. So that'll be really exciting. And if you haven't checked out the After Socrates series, we're going to be doing meetups in the Stoa at noon Toronto time. So that's Eastern time at the Stoa. So join up if you're interested in joining us for some discussions on After Socrates.
In being a philosopher.
In being a
philosopher. Practicing being a philosopher.
Nice. All right. See everybody soon.